Okie dokie.
Okay, I think we are added live here. Let's see. We should see attendees starting to trickle in. We can just wait a couple minutes for that to get going. All right, starting to see people show up. Oh God, it's Pukar from Security Pal.
Hi, Pukar.
Oh Lord, Lord have mercy. Oh goodness, and it's Keith. Well, that's good because he had a really good question that I think we want to do first. So that's fantastic. Keith from Zenput is here. That's awesome. And as folks are filtering in, thanks everybody for attending another sales strategy office hours. Our special guest today is obviously is Karen Rhorer. We'll hear more about her in a second. Oh, wonderful. Jackie Shari's here. That's delightful. Who else do we have trickling in here? Oh goodness, it's Shannon Goggin. That's wonderful. Shannon Goggin, the CEO of Noyo, is here. That's super fun. Let's see what other folks do we have coming in here. We have Holly from Pecan, who is here as well. Delightful. Where's Louis?
He is lying on the ground down here. You want to see
Is
a
he?
shot of the dog?
Oh yeah.
Here he is.
Look at that side eye.
You are interrupting my nap.
Wonderful. So as folks are joining right now, if you want to go ahead and drop your questions that you might want to have us address into the chat room, what Karen and I will do is we'll be picking from those to promote people out of the audience to chat live about their particular sales strategy question. So if you want to go ahead and if you have a particular question that you want for us to tackle, go ahead and drop that in the chat, and that way we'll have that ready to rock when we got everybody all lined up. Okay. Okay, cool. So folks are still trickling in, but I think we can get this party started. The good news is that Keith is here. Keith from Zenput is here. So Keith, we'll start with you here in a second after we introduce things here. So welcome to Sales Strategy office hours. Little bit about the format here. Frequently, I find myself doing kind of like consultation, sales strategy, sales operations consultations with Atrium customers, other folks, people who get referred to me by investors, what have you. And so one of the things that someone had commented to me about was like, man, you should really just do this publicly so that other people can get the benefit of it. And I thought that was a really great idea. And I happen to know a lot of really smart and capable sales strategy, sales operations, sales leadership folks. And so I thought, it would be one of the things that I've really enjoyed growing up was car talk. And so having a couple of people who kind of know their knitting, kicking around these questions can be very helpful for people who have questions. So that's the format. We happen to have last week we had Don Otvos from Lean Data participating, and then and this week we have Karen Rhorer, who I'll let introduce herself here. Karen?
Hi, yes, I run the customer success organization at Atrium, where I've been for about 3 years. But my background prior to customer success was in sales operations. So I set up the sales ops org at Double Dutch, event marketing software company that's now part of Cvent. and then managed sales ops for North America and EMEA for LinkedIn Learning. So went over right after the lynda.com acquisition to help set some structure and process up for that team.
Yeah. Delightful. Yeah. And I'm Pete Kazanji. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. We make sales performance analysis software. I also am the founder of Modern Sales, the nation's largest sales operations, leadership, and enablement peer education community. Probably most of the people who are attending today are familiar with Modern Sales, but if you're not, it's a great place to learn from your peers. You can check it out at modernsaleshq.com there. And then for folks who are watching this on YouTube or other places later, check that out as well. And remember to go ahead and subscribe. Okay, so just a little bit of a process here. So when we promote people, the idea is for you to share, who you are, what you do at your company, what your company does, and then before we get into the question, just so people kind of understand better context on what's going on. And they can understand that it applies to them or doesn't apply to them or what have you. And we're going to try to shoot for under 10 minutes of questions such that we can keep it rolling and service a lot of questions that folks have. So with no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and grab Keith here and promote you to a panelist. Let's see if I am able to do this.
Hello, hello.
There he is. Hey, Keith, how's it going, man?
It's going. How are you guys doing?
Excellent.
Good.
I love your wow, your home office is so delightful. And you have a Sonar shirt. Oh my goodness.
Trying to rep some of my vendors that I like, so.
Fabulous. Well, thanks for joining us. Why don't you just tell everybody what it is that your company, what it is that you do there, kind of what the ASP and the sales motion is of Zenput, and then we can get into your question here that you'd submitted previously.
Yeah, sounds good. So as Pete said, my name's Keith Jones. I run sales operations for a tech company that's based in SF that has an office in Atlanta where I'm located called Zenput. We have coined ourselves as what we call an operations execution platform. That's a really fancy way of saying task management, but it's specifically built for restaurant, retail, and now grocery, which is a brand new industry that the business is now breaking into. But the notion was basically, especially for multi-unit operators that have, say like a McDonald's franchise or multiple locations where they need to know that things are happening consistently, that food safety is being practiced correctly, which is becoming very relevant in these times now. But that was kind of the notion that the company was built on, and we're used by a lot of really cool brands, including Chipotle across the country.
Got it.
And yeah, that's me. And I've been with the organization for a little less than a year. And we've got a sales team of about 20 people right now.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and I'll just, since you wrote it out so nicely in response to my email, I'll just read it out here. You had kind of asked, how do you go about as an sales or operations leader when you enter a business and you're showing up, it's not fresh, like there was business state that was happening beforehand. How do you potentially maybe walk back something that predates your time, whether it's a CRM architecture question or what have you, or and kind of relatedly, if you've been asked to fix or solve or build something that is good for the business, but the kind of the specification is too complex, overly complex for as you deem it. How do you deal with that? How do you manage those expectations? How do you walk that back? Did I get that right?
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where, to your point, how I kind of typed it up, that it is a good thing that the business needs, that can use, that creates data that will help us grow and make better informed decisions later on. Yeah. But the kind of vision behind it doesn't really play nicely into what the technology can actually deliver on a consistent basis.
Yeah. Karen, what do you, as somebody who contended with this at Double Dutch and then at LinkedIn, I'm sure you have a pretty good take on overly complicated, CRM architectures or business processes?
Yeah, so the approach that I have taken to this in the past, because I have run into this, is to kind of walk back to first principles, right? To sit down with the people that are most impacted, or I start with the people who are most impacted and then roll up to sort of the key stakeholders in terms of decision making to say, hey, what are the priorities that this problem is trying to solve? Like, what is most important to you in terms of outcomes that you need to be able to do? And then I say, okay, I'm going to layer in what's most important to me in sales ops, because it is most important to me that this solution be scalable such that it's not taking, half of someone's time just to implement this one thing, right? As an example. And then basically what I've done is like get all the possible answers to that question up on a whiteboard to be like, well, we could keep doing things this way. Here are some other alternatives. Are there others that I haven't thought of? And really brainstorm together, how did these alternatives stack up against this list of what we agreed were the most important priorities? And I found that to be really useful in driving alignment, because the solution is co-created, right?
Right.
That it's really clear that, doing things, if it is something that's overly complex, the way we're doing them now is causing these other negative impacts. Are there options that will still meet your top priorities that won't have this downside?
Yeah. One of the metaphors that I really like to use when explaining sales operations to people, and also like in, as a sales leader, you have to think about like the operational impacts of things that you're doing, like even if your title isn't sales operations per se. One of the metaphors I like to use is that of the product manager of a sales organization. And if you think about product management, really what it's about is like there's features that need to be built that can deliver utility to the customer or the prospect, and then there's bugs that need to be resolved that are broken right now, and then you have your resources, right? Your engineering capacity or what have you. The same thing kind of applies to sales operations, where we have the things that we want to do, like maybe we have technology that we want to integrate, or we want to like implement certain business process or extend the CRM or what have you, and then and there's things that might be broken, that are enhancements there, but then there's level of effort too. Right. And so how many operations people are there at Zenput? Just you, right?
It's me, and I have a part-time contractor that does right now is like plugging gaps that are being created by this particular problem.
Yeah, but like, so for instance, like you only have one resource and there's only one Keith, and there's only 40 hours in the week or 50 hours in the week or whatever, and there's like lots of ducks on the pond that need to be addressed. And so taking that and saying like, okay, here's the situation. We don't have, like, there's lots of things that we need to do. It's not just this one thing right here. That's helpful. And then you take what Karen was talking about and saying, hey, these are the outcomes that we want to do. Can we maybe get some of the upside or a subset of the upside of this problem that we're trying to solve without like a ton of level of effort, right? Kind of like, there's like an S curve of, can we go up, like, can we go this far up the S curve? Cause like, look how high we got, versus like going all the way down here. Like, oh, look, so much more effort and only this much incremental utility there. So I think that can be a very helpful way in unpacking this to folks, especially, I think we see this all the time as Salesforce administrators or ops people, where people are like, let's just add a field.
Add a new field, yeah.
let's add a validation rule, right? Let's do this, and it's like, oh, it doesn't cost anything, and just kind of making it crystalline what the opportunity cost, like what the actual cost of it is in terms of time and energy, and then the opportunity cost. Like, as Karen was saying, like, hey, that sounds really complicated. I'm gonna have to babysit that going forward. Right? Or that's going to create a lot of like technical complexity in this CRM, and like things that will probably break later on. Although it's funny, you're wearing a Sonar t-shirt right now, which like obviates that. But anyway, I think those are things those are ways that you can approach that. Karen, anything to add before we move on to another question?
No, I mean, I think that's right. And I think it's the right framing. And I think, most of the stakeholders I've worked with have been reasonable, where, the cost, not even to me, but to you, is that I don't have time to do these other things that you've also asked for that are on your priority list. Right. So like, here's also what you get if we can do something simpler to solve this problem.
Yeah, I think my favorite piece was the co-creation. I think that's really key, because then everyone feels like, you know, even though it's not initially the initial vision that was extremely complicated, it's a new version of it that everyone had some piece in. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, guys.
Killer.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
I'm really enjoying seeing everybody's like home offices too. I love your standing desk. All right, Keith. Well, I'll see you later.
All right, thanks.
All right, let me see how to do this. I change role to attendee. It's a very small call to action. I'll get good at this eventually. Okay, killer. So this is a really great question that Pukar is asking here. Let's go ahead and promote Pukar here. Magic, Zoom, go. Promote. Hey, there he is.
Hey, Pukar.
Hello. Hey, how's it going?
Pukar. Hey, good to see you, man. Pukar, why don't you introduce yourself, what it is that you do, and what your organization does, kind of what the size of the sales organization and the sales motion, and then we can get into your question.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for taking my question. Really good to see you again, Karen. So my name is Pukar. I'm the founder and CEO of SecurityPal. Essentially, we're working with a handful of early stage companies like Airtable, Figma, to help automate the security review and security questionnaire pain for them, which is a big pain point for a lot of sales orgs.
And Atrium, excuse me.
And Atrium.
Customers too, dude. Why did you list us before Airtable?
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, so yeah, that's basically what I'm doing right now. I'm the de facto AE because I'm working on the sales motion, and was just like shooting out some campaigns right before this call. So very good timing to discuss sales model and get Karen's thoughts. But like one of the things I'm seeing from a lot of folks, especially on LinkedIn and like a bunch of other thought leadership that goes out there for better or worse, is a lot of different sales motions that come about, right? Like there's the sales-led model that a lot of organizations talk about, and then there's the product-led that has allowed Slack, Zoom, and all these other companies to grow. And I think there's a lot of confusion for early stage founders like myself and others around like, what are the trade-offs that you're making, whether at the early stage or at the mid stage? What trade-offs are you seeing, Karen and Pete, since you guys see a lot of sales organizations, between the product-led growth go-to-market motion versus the traditional sales-led model? And how are organizations thinking about like staffing up vis-a-vis these models, and where are like the inflection points? I know that's like a really big and meaty question, but wanted to get your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Karen, what do you think?
So I'm seeing product-led growth be adopted really aggressively by folks where the pain point isn't complicated to explain and the solution isn't complicated to implement.
Right.
Because that's where it works really well, right? That's where it brings your cost of customer acquisition way down, and then your unit economics are better, your margins are better, right?
Yep.
And so I'm seeing a big push towards product-led growth with those types of companies, and then I'm seeing sales-led growth at our solution is more complicated. It requires sales engineering effort. It requires implementation, right? That you need some help setting it up and customizing it. And then it works really well once it's customized. But until then, like, you're not going to be able to get as much utility by yourself. And so, having you try and get frustrated is probably net worse than leaning in on a sales-led model. So that's kind of the differentiation that I'm seeing. Obviously, you can invest product resources into making the implementation, the customization, the get value out of the software process easier for people. But if you think about a solution like a sales engagement platform, right? Like an Outreach or a Sales Loft or one of those, like that's going to be really hard to get a ton of value out of if you're starting from, bare bones, I don't understand how to set up like a sequence or a cadence or why one would do that, or right. Like there needs to be some education in that process in order for the solution to really deliver the full value.
Yeah. And I think Karen really nailed it about what, like, the problem that you're solving. Can it be addressed with a product-led motion? Like, there's just some problems that it's very difficult to sell an HRIS or an ATS in a product-led motion, right? It's like an end user can't just adopt it. Like a recruiter can't be like, you know what, I really don't like JobBite. I'm gonna start using Greenhouse on the side. It doesn't work, right? So I think part of it is, well, how does it fit with your market? That said, I think there are creative ways that folks can go about this. So like, actually, I mean, Karen, who leads customer success at Atrium, she has to contend with this a little bit insofar as like Atrium has a more and more product-led motion where it's extremely easy. We've invested a bunch of engineering resources in to make it such that it's extraordinarily easy for people to light up Atrium and get amazing sales performance analysis, like analytics harness, very quickly, takes 10 minutes to set up. At which point account executives get involved and what have you. And then there's a later upsell component to it. So I think there's like, hey, what is the functionality that can be done, or like what is the market that you're playing into? You asked a little bit about like staffing. Well, what ends up happening in that regard is usually what ends up happening in product-led sales organizations is the sales reps look more like more like customer success or like helpers than they do like sellers. You see this in historically kind of like engineering driven sales organization, or sorry, engineering facing organizations like Xamarin or New Relic or Datadog or what have you. And then the behavior ends up being a little bit like messier, has like interesting implications for your CRM strategy as well. Like if you have little pockets of usage, like Frame is being used here in this organization, or Figma is being used here, and here. Well, then the seller has to kind of come in and like scoop all that up, right? Whereas like so it has implications for the account model, has implications for how you're going to be modeling opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the upshot there is that it really depends, and you have to think about the upside is it lowers customer acquisition costs, allows you to slide in easily, but sometimes you just can't do it. Like oftentimes it's just very difficult to have a product-led motion when you're doing something that is like wall-to-wall software, right? Cool. Anything to add before we move on to our next question?
No, I think that covers it.
Cool.
Thanks guys. Yeah, thanks for the perspective and appreciate the opportunity to ask the question. Thank you.
Okay. See you. Wonderful. Okay, folks. So as we're moving along here, if people have incremental questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat here. Dan Grossberg from Clyde is here, and so he submitted a question ahead of time. So I'm going to go ahead and promote him to a panelist right now. Mr. Dan. Hey.
Hey guys.
There he is. He's got his fancy schmancy glasses on.
Sorry.
Oh my
also
goodness.
has a sonar shirt on.
Also, you nerds. All right, Dan. Why don't you tell us what Clyde does, what you do there, what the sales organization looks like, et cetera, and we can get into your question.
Totally. Yeah. Thanks, Pete. Thanks, Karen. So Clyde is in the very sexy extended warranty space, where we help online retailers offer their customers, different variations of extended warranty on different products that could be covered. So the reason why Clyde exists is because extended warranties are very cumbersome for many retailers to offer. It's very cumbersome for consumers to redeem or redeem a warranty. And it's very hard for retailers to manage their relationships with different types of insurers in order to offer warranty coverage. Clyde makes that process so much easier by building it offering a platform for, all different parties to log into a web interface and do all that sorts of magic. I'm on week 2 at Clyde.
Nice.
And yeah, so the team itself, it's a really small company. There's about 22 total employees today. Last week there was even less. There was like 15 or so. So we just brought some new folks on board.
Wow.
As far as the sales organization, still very super small. We have 4 BDRs and 3 account executives, if my math is correct.
There you go.
Yep, our sales motion ranges, kind of depends on the size of the retailer that we're interacting with, that I'm learning. So the smaller ones, and depending on the technology that they use on their websites, can go much quicker. We're talking like 30-day sales cycle. And then the larger ones can last upwards of 6 to 8 months, depending on the complexity of the integration, the website that we're working with.
Makes sense.
Cool. So
yeah, so your question had been on how do you prioritize? You want to expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So coming into such a new industry and a small company, everybody's still in that wearing many different hats type phase, right? So there aren't real clear swim lanes on responsibilities and everything. So everybody's asking for everything, especially when this is a new function that's being brought on. To further pour a little bit of gasoline on this new hiring ramp process for myself, the company went through a little bit of a reorganization on day 4. So still trying to get all that sorted in terms of our go-to-market team, what that looks like, who it's comprised of, as well as like what the strategy is. So on top of trying to learn the business, to learn the industry, and luckily the Salesforce instance is fresh enough, so there's plenty to build and I don't need to rip out and replace too much.
Right.
But really it's like, where do I begin? How do I prioritize?
Got it. Karen, you want to start us off?
Sure. So there are 2, I think, ways that I would approach this or have approached this in the past. One is when you're starting with a blank slate, that's wonderful because it is so much easier to do things right the first time than to go like fix a bunch of stuff that's been done half-assedly or in a way that doesn't make sense or not done at all and should have been done, right?
Right.
So one of the things that, I do that we did at Atrium early days is say, hey, what are the things that are going to get really painful really quickly if we don't get ahead of them now? Right. And so that's things like, hey, we are going to automatically overwrite the close date when an opportunity gets moved to closed. So we know actually how long it took, our sales cycle took. We are going to auto name opportunities so that we don't have opportunities named like attempt 2 or something like that, because that was just what somebody felt like naming it that day. And we are going to auto create renewal opportunities when an opportunity gets closed won so that we don't lose any of those renewals because they fell through a crack somewhere. So I like those 3 were things that we were just like, let's just do it now before there are AEs in the CRM, so that there will be some level of things not getting totally out of whack that need to be fixed like from the jump. In general approach to prioritization, Pete actually referenced this earlier about thinking about kind of what drives value and what's the level of effort. So if you think of it as like a 2x2 of where one axis is value and the other axis is level of effort, anything that is high value, low level of effort is like, do it now, right? Yeah. Pick off all the low hanging fruit. You can get it done quickly. You can knock a bunch of stuff out and deliver a lot of value, right? The stuff that is high value, high level of effort, that's, what gets prioritized in terms of, okay, we're going to have to kind of calendar this out, but all of these things we want to get done, we need to get done. Let's make a plan to get them done, right? Anything that's low value, low level of effort, that's like, okay, let's try and like, drop those in, right, into that plan. And anything that's high level of effort, low value is like, yeah, we're not going to do that. Roughly. So that's kind of, it's a simplified structure, but that is kind of how I think about prioritization.
Yeah. So while Karen was giving us her wonderful answer, I wanted to grab a couple resources for you. So one, I had a LinkedIn thread the other day that was hilarious where I asked this exact question, and a bunch of people dropped like, it was mainly like CRM questions. And your question isn't exactly like CRM focused. Obviously, it's one thing that we think about. So I just dropped that into the chat room there, and then people can check it out. I think the other thing, there's kind of like two things you can do that it's maybe more like strategic, or it's related to the kind of that latter thing that Karen was talking about like what's the 2x2. So like first you got to think about the things that could be done, right? And so what can be helpful there can be like a maturity models. So I'm dropping into the chat room right now this maturity model that we put together at Atrium. It's like there's a pretty PDF version of it, but then there's also kind of like a more functional kind of like janky spreadsheet version of it in there, so you can check that out. And then so that's like one thing is, okay, what are like the best practices in general? And so that's where that, and then there's another thing where like you can audit it, you can do an audit yourself and say, hey, where are we at here? And just kind of take stock of what's happening there. And so I think there was a thread on this the other day where in MSP where a leader was kind of saying like, hey, I'm coming in, it's for my first 90 days and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And I think I responded with this. This is a sales maturity health check. I'm going to drop it in here in the chat room for everybody, that I use when I'm talking to new companies, just to like say, hey, where are you at? Like, how mature are you? Where do you have shortfalls? And so what you can do is if you go through that, and it's not going to be exhaustive, but essentially you can kind of take stock of the bugs, like the thing, like, cool, we have these things under control, these things are not under control, and then you can that can kind of go in the list with maturity, like, okay, well, I think we need to implement this, I think we need to implement this, I think we need to implement this, et cetera, et cetera. Well, now you have essentially your ducks on the pond, so to speak, and then you can kind of decide, okay, who are we going to go after first? What are the resources that we have? I think in your case, we just have, it's not dissimilar to Keith. We just got Dan, right? Right. So how much resources do we have? And like, how many nights can we make him stay up till 2 a.m., et cetera, et cetera. And then you can, once you have that list of things to be done, then you can kind of do what Karen was talking about and kind of prioritize and say, all right, let's start with these things first, et cetera. And then I think the thing that you can do is say, great, you can do sprints where you can say, cool, these are the first things that we're going to do. It's going to take us I think it's going to take us about this amount of time. It's right here in Trello or Asana or whatever. You can see the status of it. And then, maybe we'll go for 2 weeks and 2 weeks, and then we'll take a pause and we'll say, cool, did we get the things out of it that we wanted to get out of it? And then, all right, here are the next things on the list. Are those still the next things on the list? Oh no, like, there was a pandemic and all of a sudden people are, buying the hell out of our software, and like, we really need to implement a deal desk process ASAP because it's raining orders. Okay, cool. Well, maybe that goes to the top of the priority list now because new information showed up and things changed. So that's how I would go about that. Anything else before we move on to the next question?
I kind of have a related question, and if it's like too heavy, don't stress about it. But it relates to what you guys were chatting about before, like the bad habit sort of thing. So like certainly in prior roles, I've certainly had the bad habit of moving too fast, like plugging in band-aids or plugging in gaps as opposed to doing things correctly. Either it's external pressures or you are just trying to move fast because there is a global pandemic, what it may be. Do you have any tips of how to break that habit, and like what are some new habits I could replace it with to get me, better about doing like the sprint release sort of thing?
So you're saying you need to learn how to say no? Is that what you're saying?
I see, like part of me is like, no, I know how to say no, but then like my actions don't support that. So yeah.
Karen, as somebody, Karen managed a huge ran sales operations at Double Dutch, which was a huge sales organization. I think it was like 50, 60 reps, and with a small team that could be agile enough to like yeah, I can just go do that. Whereas at LinkedIn, obviously, there's like gating and like, yeah, it's not like we just jump into the CRM and start like hacking around. How did you contend with this at Double Dutch, Karen? Do you have any recommendations there?
Yeah, so I at Double Dutch actually did like a very much like a product planning process. I did a quarterly planning process with the team where we were, you know, whiteboarding all of the requests, all of the projects that we thought were important, and would kind of come up with the level of effort value pieces and have a prioritized list, and kind of like assigning story points in Jira for folks that interface with their product teams a lot. Actually assign like, how much effort is this really going to take, and try and be honest about that, because that was how we assigned projects for the quarter. On the specific question of doing the like quick and dirty version versus the like longer, more complicated but more correct version, it was a conversation because sometimes the quick and dirty version was good enough, right? And we're like, how long will this be good enough for? I think was sometimes the relevant question. Like, if this will be good enough for a year, then like, fine, let's do the good enough version. And we know that in a year we will need to pay off that technical debt and do the right version. But if it's, hey, this is going to be a Band-Aid that's going to need another Band-Aid next quarter, that's going to need another Band-Aid the quarter after that, that's when it was like, okay, we're not going to do that. We are going to invest the time to do things correctly from the beginning.
Yeah. And I think another one there too is, so Karen was talking about like strategic planning and, you know, methodical, like effort planning or what have you. But then I think we all know like the tickets that show up where like you get emailed, you get someone blowing you up on Slack, they're like, hey, XYZ, et cetera, et cetera. And like, you're working with a stakeholder, whether it's a sales manager or sales leader. It could just be something as simple as like, hey, can you help me with this report, et cetera. And I think the important thing there is just to make sure that like it's kind of that 2x2 that Karen was talking about like high impact or like impact versus level of effort. If something is like really low level of effort, and I'm a big fan of the productivity model of getting things done, like GTD. So if something takes like less than like 2 or 4 minutes or something, and it's a pain in some sales managers, some sales leaders, some executives ask, and you happen to have like the magical superpowers by which to resolve that, well, if you can just knock it out, that's going to earn you a bunch of karma points. Again, if it's less than 5 minutes, right? Versus, but then if it's something that's going to take longer than that, it's kind of like, okay, this is the Eisenhower matrix, right? So we just say, cool, this is something that like seems like it might be important. I can't just like knock it out right now. Great, I'm going to put that in Asana. I'm going to put that in Trello or whatever, and then we will then look at that at the next, planning process. And that's why if you have a release point, like even if it's a sprint meeting, like a weekly sprint meeting or like every 2 week sprint meeting, if you know that you have that like Steam release valve there, then, and you know that you're going to log it in a to-do list, well, then it ceases to be ephemeral. Like, I got to do it right now before I forget, because like, cool, we're going to get to it. Cause like, next Monday, we're going to go through this list. So like it releases the tension of like, I got to do it now before I forget. All right, wonderful. So Dan, delightful to see you. I'm going to go hug and bring somebody else in. Okay.
Thanks guys. I really appreciate it.
Okay. See you. So I think what we're going to bring in here next is going to be Bryce from Senbird. Let me see if this works here.
Hey, hi.
Hey,
Hi.
Bryce, how you doing?
Good, and you?
Excellent. So I want you to introduce yourself to everybody. What you do at Senbird, size of Senbird sales organization, and then we'll get into your question. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm Brice. I'm sales operation MEA at Senbird. So yeah, Senbird is a leading in chat API, and also we recently launched our 2 new product, call and video.
Oh, neat.
So yeah, all sales we're like on 3 different regions, APAC, MEA, and the US, of course. Working across like 4 different time zones, 2 time zones in Europe, 2 time zones in the US, and 2 in APAC. Kind of crazy how to sync everyone together.
I can imagine.
So yeah.
How big is the sales organization?
The sales organization about like 35 people.
Got it.
And
Got
the
it.
company going toward 200 people this year.
Wonderful. And so your question was around self-service opportunities?
Yeah, so it's a question that keep following me on all the company I've been. It's like this time we just recently introduced self-service, and the question is, do you put self-service in Salesforce? And if you do it, how do you do it? Because most of the time we're facing the issue of 100% self-served and sales as it is self-served. So is there a reason to put it in Salesforce? And if yes, what would be the best way, in your opinion, or people that have done it before?
I think there'd be so clarification. What is the volume of like self-serve transactions that are happening? I know you guys just shipped this. So TBD, it sounds like.
So we're starting to see quite a bit. I noticed the difference between US and EMEA, where in EMEA, half of the self-serve opportunity have been handled by a sales rep before, while in the US, there is a lot of 100% self-serve. So if I were to look at them, there were no activity by a sales rep before the opportunity closed. But I think that going down the line, we will still have this kind of discrepancy. Depending on the region, maybe it would be a 70-30% or a 50-50% in some region. Mm-hmm. And there's like the tracking of it in Salesforce that is always a pain, because when there is upsell, if you start building an automation, you duplicate the number of opportunities. You end up having an open pipeline that might contain some opportunity that were closed by a self-serve opportunity already. And It's hard to do the link between those two, because one is automated and the other one is opened by a sales rep.
Yep, for sure. Karen, you want to take a shot at this, or you want me to start?
Either way. My experience with this is how LinkedIn was trying to navigate this. So at a very large company.
Let's do it. We can start with that, and then I can follow up.
So when I was at LinkedIn, if you think about products like Sales Navigator, right, where there's a self-serve solution that you can buy, right? You can go on LinkedIn.com and buy yourself a Sales Navigator license, or you can buy Sales Navigator from LinkedIn, which is actually a different product because it includes like Team Link and the features that make Sales Navigator work better if everybody in your company is on Sales Navigator. Right. What LinkedIn did with that kind of example is the self-serve opportunities don't show up in Salesforce, but it is really important that the sales reps be able to access that data. So LinkedIn built internal tooling so that the sales reps knew for any of their accounts, like how many people at this account already have self-serve licenses, because that then turns into part of their sales pitch, right? Like, hey, X of your sales reps already found this valuable enough that they're paying for it. And this is how much more incrementally valuable it gets if you are on Enterprise Sales Navigator. And so you're using Team Link. And so you have all of this extra information available. You have all of this extra data that shows up natively in Salesforce without having to be out on LinkedIn's site. So I think that piece is the piece that's really important, right? That the sales reps need to be able to access the information of, if I'm trying to work this account, do people already have self-serve licenses at this account or not? One thing on the LinkedIn Learning side that there was the question of sales assisted self-serve. And so the trying to get like, hey, if a self-serve comes in on an account that an AE owns, because the AE said, actually, for that number of seats, you can just go buy them on the website. And the AE should still get credit. How do we get that into Salesforce? Because it had to be in Salesforce for the AE to get paid quota on it, or to retire quota against it to get paid commission on it. Yep. As it turns out, coming up with the set of rules for that is pretty complicated. Like, look, it's certainly doable, right? Like, okay, it only counts and it only shows up in Salesforce and you only retire quota against it if you already had an open opportunity, right, with this account, is a rule that you could put in place that could simplify things. But then if you want all that information in a Salesforce and you want AEs to be able to retire quota against it, you just have to be really clear up front about, this is the rule, this is the way this is going to work, and this is what we're running with, because it can get really messy really quickly.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the rule of thumb that I use here is one of the things I like, the way I like to describe a CRM to folks is a CRM can be a to-do list, it can be a report card, and it can be a crystal ball. And so when you think about your question of should we be pushing these self-serve ops into the CRM, well, is there a need from a to-do list standpoint? Like, a good example of this would be, these are the opportunities that I as a rep need to manage. It's my pipeline, right? If that's not the case, then perhaps not, right? As Karen pointed out, well, there is a to-do list where if you're gonna go shopping in these things and try to figure out like, ooh, someone from Lockheed Martin signed up for Sendbird, and I want to pursue that account because, like, obviously that's a huge organization, right? Then we need the reps to be able to do that. That could be done in the CRM, it could be done outside the CRM, but you have to think about that. Then there's the report card component, which is, hey, how do we do? Right? How did this rep do? How did the business do? Right, so like Atrium, for instance, we focus very much on, sales performance analysis of, like, at the rep level. How's this rep doing? Like, how have they done previously? How are they pacing towards goals, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is, okay, in the case of the self-serve ops, if we're trying to answer questions, like, what is our conversion rate on these, what at a rep level or a business level or what have you? Well, then maybe we might want to use the CRM as a kind of like a hacky data store plus like reporting system. Like, maybe if we don't have core BI set up. So in that case, you might want to do that, but do it in such a way that it doesn't like screw up other things for other people. Like, these opportunities get created over here, but they get assigned to this God user, and it stays out of all these other people's pipelines, and it doesn't get confusing or anything like that. So that would be another thing to think about. And then the last thing would, of course, be like the crystal ball example, which is like forecasting where we're going to land, et cetera, et cetera. And so just thinking about that, like, are you trying to, in your case, I think that you're saying these are just transactions, so it kind of already happened. It's not like, hey, these people started a trial and we're trying to report on whether or not they're probably going to transact or what have you. So that's a way that I would approach thinking about that. So kind of it's specific to your use case there.
And I like the way that Karen described the way you did it. But I was wondering, in terms of upsell, because if it's someone self-serve, maybe the first opportunity, the sales rep was there, he helped to close the deal. But then as you can grow a bit more still as a self-serve, how do you deal with those kind of opportunities where the sales rep sold the first one, it still be like, yeah, you can go to self-serve, but then the next opportunity is self-served again, but an upsell. Do you still push it into Salesforce, or do you just update the amount of the account and you notify the sales rep that, hey, your account grew, but there is no opportunity for that?
Yeah, so once an initial deal was sold by a sales rep or that a sales rep got credit for, broad strokes generally speaking, the renewal would be auto-created and that account would transfer ownership to a relationship manager, right? Or an account manager, a customer success manager, depending on your organization, whoever. So somebody owned quota against that account. And since they owned quota against that account, even if there was a self-serve kind of upsell, that rep would still get credit for it. Like, great, lucky break, good for you, but because
Okay.
they were carrying quota against the account.
Yeah, okay, I see. Okay,
Cool.
thank you.
Wonderful.
That's kind of
Hey,
answer.
thank you very much. Oh, did you have something you wanted to add, Karen?
No,
Oh, I was just
that
going to say,
oh.
Henry had left the comment that at a prior organization, all of the self-serve opportunities got created, and that, it sounds like, was not the right answer for them.
Yeah, so Henry Mizell, who's going to join us here in a second, lead sales strategy at Breather. This is why I asked the initial question, like, what volume are we talking about here? Because Breather has a lot of volume of self-serve usage, and I think it got messy in a hurry. So that's why I think the first thing is like, okay, what's the volume that we're talking about here? Are we going to totally cruft up our CRM instance? Wonderful.
Okay.
Well, thanks for joining us, Bryce. Take care.
Bye.
Okay, wonderful. So I think this is going to be our last one, and we're going to go ahead and grab Henry, who we were just talking about here, and promote him to a panelist.
Hey, can you hear me?
There he is.
Yes.
Yes, we can. Hey, Henry, how you doing?
Yeah, I can't complain. Doing well.
Wonderful. So Henry, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, introduce yourself, Breather, and your sales organization, and we can kind of get into your question here.
Yeah, so I lead revenue strategy at Breather. Breather is, so we have 500 spaces in the US, Europe, and we rent them anything from kind of an hour a day, a month, up to a couple of years now, because they're private self-contained spaces, and that's what everyone wants as their office. So the last kind of 18 months, we pivoted to that as well. So it's funny business from a kind of a reporting standpoint, because we have this weird mix of a high volume inbound kind of lower transaction, and then your typical more like B2B sales motion on the larger office stuff, and trying to juggle those two together. It's
right.
A challenge.
and so you submitted your question ahead of time. Was what's a good mechanism by which to identify dormant ops that are coming back into a buyer cycle? And maybe that's something that is more generalizable. So essentially, how to go about a resurrection process, and effectively go about that. Is that anything to add on that?
Yeah. So, and this kind of touches on the previous question of self-serve as well. There's a strong benefit if you have that self-serve business in with your traditional kind of inbound inquiry lead flow business, then it's all in one place, and you can kind of score and rate off the back of that.
Yep.
But usually it's a huge amount of volume. Data quality is pretty poor at the best of times, if not just completely incorrect. So just kind of wanted to understand what everyone's approaches were, and kind of learnings from that.
Got it. Karen?
Yeah, so in terms of re-engage processes, I have done everything from the very simple to the much more like complicated and automated, right? The first time that I did this at Double Dutch, where we hadn't had any process previously, was much more around, hey, any account with a close lost opportunity where the close lost reason wasn't that the account was disqualified, goes back into the list of these accounts are high priority to continue to be included when we do territory redistributions. And here's reporting for you sales reps on accounts with opportunities that were closed lost 4 months ago, because that was kind of the time frame that we saw in general that it made sense to go take another bite at the apple. So that was like very kind of simple, not automated, just serving up the information to the AEs who wanted it and were asking for it, right? The kind of next step from there that I've done at a few places is to actually create a re-engage date. So this is particularly useful, I've seen, in places where you have competitors and you're waiting for that competitor's contract to be over.
Yeah.
So that the re-engage date can default to, you know, a frequency that makes sense for your organization, 90 days, 120 days, 180 days, whatever, after the opportunity is closed lost. But the sales reps can overwrite it with, hey, actually, they told me they're, you know, I work for Greenhouse and they're under contract with Lever, and they told me that that contract runs out on December 31st. So what I'm going to do is 2 months before that, that's when I want to re-engage. And so the re-engage date will be set based on the contract end date being there. And if there are re-engage dates kind of always populated, then not only does that get served back up to the AEs and you can automate some, you know, cadences from your sales engagement software and things like that, that's also a place where at larger organizations with lots of accounts that there can be specific marketing drips keyed off of that. So maybe marketing drips start leading up to the sales re-engage date, right? And then sales takes over from there. So that is another way that I've seen be effective.
Yeah. It's funny. My thought went exactly to like Lever and Greenhouse as well, because in situations where there's a specific reason why you can't, like they can't transact right now because they're under contract, that's a really good approach. I think one thing that I've seen, so first of all, resurrecting closed loss opportunities is phenomenal lead source.
Yeah,
like
much higher win rates than
amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. And so if you're not doing it, like you're missing a huge opportunity. Like use Atrium as an example. We actually have 2 tiers of re-engagement because it's so easy to turn on people's sales performance data in Atrium. We get a lot of folks who like turn it on and then they're like, oh, okay, cool. Like now's not the right time or whatever, but they already have like a fully implemented performance analytics harness. So re-engaging them in 2 months is like, yeah, it's still working. Right. So it ends up being a very important thing. So I think that's just like an important thing to note to folks, that if you're not doing resurrection, like cadence resurrection, you really got to start doing it, and tag it as an op source, like as a lead source. Gets a little complicated because it's like, well, wait a minute, it came in the first run through the pipe, it came in through this lead source, and now it's this lead source. So we'll leave that over to the marketing operations people to figure that out. But I think it's still important to have that. The other thing too is that it's important to cadence it, and I'll kind of talk about like the less operationally focused and the more kind of like grimy approach here. Even just doing something where you have your closed loss date because you created a workflow rule to stamp your closed loss date appropriately. You have a report that says, hey, here are the ops that closed loss between 2 to 4 months ago. Call it, depending on like what's an appropriate re-engage time. And then you just drop that report into a recurring Google Calendar invite that like, so the process can be as rudimentary as that. Like, okay, cool. This is the date on this month, every month where we go back and look at the opportunities that need to be resurrected. The last thing I'll note there is that typically account executives are terrible at this. And so oftentimes what they'll be loath to send it back to SDR. This is kind of like a sub example of like the dreaded nurture stage, like hibernate stage or whatever, where AEs will leave an op open. It's like, oh yeah, no, I'm just waiting on that. It's like, yeah, sure you are. It's usually better just to get it out of their pipe and then give it to somebody who's specifically compensated to get it back on the calendar. I know you might say like, well, wait a minute, the AEs, they're compensated to get back on the calendar because eventually they'll close it. Well, depending on like how heavily loaded your AEs are, this is like one of the first things they're not going to do. So just like recomping on it for an SDR, like SDRs love it. They'll do it because it's an easy meeting to get on the calendar. If you're paying like a 50% or $50 rip or like an $80 rip or whatever it is in order for getting a meeting on the calendar for an SDR, if your ASP is like 10, 15, 20, 25, 50K or what have you, okay, another $50 or another $80 in order to make sure that actually really, really, really gets on the calendar is totally worth it. So I think those are a couple of things that I would note there. Anything else to add, Karen or Henry, before we wrap? Nope.
That's
Okay,
yeah, no, that's really helpful. We've been doing it on a kind of report-based, filter-based approach, but the automation is a great idea. So thanks.
Yeah, wonderful. Cool. So I think that's all the time that we have today. This was super fun. Karen, thank you very much for coming and sharing your voluminous knowledge with everybody. So just as a reminder to folks, this is recorded. I'll send it out to everybody after the fact. We're doing this weekly. Next week, we're gonna have Corey Bray from Closed Loop. He's the author of many awesome sales strategy, sales management books. So he's gonna be here next Friday. Everybody who attended and registered will get an invite to that. But otherwise, thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thank you all.
Okay, bye.